Hello and welcome to Silicon Valley Innovation Center, where we promote discussion about innovative technologies through our executive immersion programs and events, just like we have today. My name is Rahim Rahimtullah, a brand ambassador here at SVIC. With me today is Nima Shomali. Nima is a lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, and managing partner at Acceleration Technology Partners. We'll be having a short interview with Nima today ahead of a longer webinar he's going to be giving for us next month. And we're going to have all the details of that webinar for you a little later. And don't forget, wherever you might be watching us, it could be YouTube or Facebook. If you have any questions for Nima, you can send those in to us via the comments section. But first, Nima, many thanks for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
I wondered if I could, just to start, ask you a little bit about your work there at ATP. I know that you focus a lot on innovation and helping firms innovate better. But I hope you could just unpack that for us a little bit. I know innovation has sort of become this buzzword, a sort of catch-all term, if you will. So what does it mean to be more innovative?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm managing partner of Acceleration Technology Partners, and just to specify, I'm a fellow in the UC Berkeley Haas Amina Center, which is kind of the Asia, Middle East, North Africa Center, but has broader programs. But thank you again for having me. Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I like how you say that, is it a buzzword? That's one thing that we kind of are very aware of, and I think that I'm always surprised by just how much attention that word in itself kind of attracts. In every conversation that innovation comes up, right? I always wonder kind of what is the end game when people discuss it. I think from the way that we teach it, the more kind of like I think classical definition is, a forward-thinking approach to business, staying ahead of the competition, creative ways of thinking, and minimizing cost and risk. Typically to drive new products, new lines of revenue, and kind of keep the business moving forward. And that definitely applies to the public sector, to governments, universities, and like we said, it's a forward-thinking approach typically. And obviously we have our view on what does it actually mean in practice, and I'll expand on this more later, but for us, I think that innovation in and of itself, I don't think is right for all firms unless they're ready for it. Which means the way that we typically look at, firms, whether it's, like I said, private sector or again, a government institution or university, is that firms need to be structured and optimized before they put in an innovative practice. Because the way we think about it is, a company that has many, many business units that are not working together coherently, that are not communicating across the company, that are not leveraging all the parts of the business to take advantage of the business, increase cost. They haven't leveraged data to overall, drive revenue from the existing resources. And then if you put in an innovation program, right, it's kind of like an arm that's not attached to the body that you're now trying to, say like, okay, do this thing. Whereas what you have already has so much additional revenue capture and cost minimization that if you put in innovation programs in all these different disjointed areas, it doesn't really make sense. So that's kind of one of the, for us, I think our core view, when we take a mixture of an academic view of it, evidence-based, we take an industry view of it, what has worked in practice. For us, the most important thing always is making sure companies are first optimized, which is running efficiently, right? De-siloed. And then you put an innovation program into practice.
So then you say you do have a firm which has happened to reach this stage of optimization, and they might be ready then to innovate. What does that mean then in practice? How are you going to know down the road that firm has achieved innovation? What does that then look like?
Yeah, and innovation, there's a couple of ways of looking at it, right? So what we define as innovation for us, we'd like to separate it out because every firm that wants to innovate, what they're trying to accomplish with innovation should be, there's one of two options. It's either tied to the firm's current competitive advantage, right, in their existing products, or it's not. It's a wholly new kind of area, right? And an innovation center, a corporate incubator. And those two kind of, structures that we're looking at, new product development or, like we say, corporate innovation in isolation, those are different structures. They have different outcomes. And you measure them essentially by the success of the product, right? If you have launched a new product that is tied to your existing brand, is tied to your existing, data, and is leveraging your firm's competitive advantage, and it has done that successfully, right? That we define as success. It's taking the firm's existing resources and leveraging them. And then corporate innovation in isolation would be, okay, let's say we have a big firm that wants to start building new products, or like we say, a government institution that wants to launch an incubator and innovate for the economy. What's important is that, you don't take an enormous amount of money and throw it at a problem, right, that you are trying to find. And so corporate innovation, what it should be doing is it should be giving the smartest people in your organization or your economy the chance to create something, leverage parts of your existing structure, right, whether it's subject matter experts or data, but keeping that separate from the overall kind of brain of the organization. Mm-hmm. Because corporate innovation truly flourishes when it is separated from the overall kind of strategy of the firm. Otherwise, what happens is what begins as corporate innovation ends up kind of attaching itself to what the firm is already doing. And then you have people that start coming in and changing things around. And so the way we think about it is, if it is corporate innovation, right, and I can't stress that enough, if it's part of the firm's existing competitive advantage or outside of it, those are how we measure success, right? Has it cost way more than it would in isolation, or has it helped the firm's competitive advantage? Those are the two models that we look at.
And Nima, it sounds like either way you approach it is going to be some risk involved here, and it sounds like what you're describing is sort of a way to try to minimize that risk by keeping things separate, choosing a bunch of smart people or a sector of your company to sort of go away and experiment. But it's inherent, is it, that if you want to innovate, you are just going to have to take some risks? I mean, it could go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's why what we try and do is separate out corporate innovation from the main company's overall business. You don't associate it with their brand, typically. You don't tie it to the corporate strategy. You don't, leverage the overall firm's operations, because what you're trying to do is not bet the entire firm on something like that, right? And you see the companies that get it right are the ones that really truly allow, the smartest people to have a chance to build something internally, kind of undisturbed, while still leveraging the firm's resources. That does minimize cost and risk. And overall, and we stress that because there are companies that spend billions on corporate innovation, if that's what you want to call it, but it's essentially, somebody coming up with an idea and it going straight to management and they saying yes or no. And that's the whole point. It shouldn't be that way because it's bottom up. And so the way we want to think about it when we say minimize risk, the reason I can't stress that enough is that the way firms go about it frequently is not done in a methodical way, right? And so that's our whole going thinking is always like, what has worked, proven to work empirically, in the academia. And then we also are very cognizant about, like, in industry, what has worked and what hasn't. And right. That overall, if you take the right methodology, it shouldn't create, that type of risk.
So it's sort of a framework there to try and manage that risk. But maybe can you tell me, we talk about, how do you go about innovation? I think there's sort of maybe an assumption that tech firms are particularly good at this, and they're built to be able to do this better than firms from other industries. I wonder if you think, is that true? And perhaps can you give us some examples of, companies or industries where you see that innovation has worked and does work well, and others where maybe it doesn't?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. I think that that's where the concept of digital transformation has, I think, become very popular. Tech firms have been able to innovate, because their operations inherently are set up in such a way that everything is digital. So they can be very agile. They can make decisions very quickly based on data. And they can take the data that they have, because again, the company, if it's a tech firm, it's built on data. And they can make those kind of pivots and those operational changes very quickly. And so, do I think that those firms have an overall an advantage? Yes, in their structure, but other firms, and that's kind of what we think, is that the biggest chance to innovate is actually in non-tech firms who optimize their operations and then innovate by structuring themselves like tech firms, right? Which means that making sure they're sharing data between business units and between products and correlating, right? And so I think that there are a lot of industries that we look at them that are ripe for that.
Where do you see the most potential?
I think the financial industry, traditional media companies. If you think of traditional media companies, right, they're older legacy companies, right? And a lot of the decision making, a lot of the different business units aren't sharing as much data, right? Because it's much more of a creative process in a way that kind of, optimizes the firm's operations. And all these, manufacturing, logistics, right? My kind of core interest a lot of the time are a lot of these slightly more legacy businesses that are non-tech. And, we take a tech approach to that, right? With they have so much room to innovate and optimize because of exactly that, right? They're older legacy business. And so, there's a huge market for that. I mean, tech firms, by their very nature, because things can change so quickly and things can spring up overnight, have to be like that. But if you think of a, big shipping and logistics company, there's, less pressure on them at some level because you're not going to have another player that just spring up overnight and take your value proposition. And so they haven't had to kind of create that innovation and optimization of their existing kind of structure that we think is critically important.
So with those bigger legacy companies in those sort of slightly slower paced industries, is it sort of in that sense more of a challenge then to, when you talk to them and you have to say, look, you really do need to disrupt yourselves? I mean, if I can use that term, maybe is that too cliche, or is that actually the thinking that you have to go in there with, and it's a case of trying to convince them to see that bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, and I always think, I don't have my whiteboard here to draw it out, but what we think about it is this, and that's where like some of the challenge comes, because everybody hears blockchain, right? Everybody, and we have had people that are trying to develop farms in the Philippines that, with whom we've spoken, that talk about blockchain, right? And, blockchain, everybody hears it and gets excited and one thinks that there's, some mystical application to it. And if we think of like, the tip of a, spear, right? And maybe blockchain is at the very tip, right? But the entire everything before it is not as solid as it could be. You could put all the time in the world, fixing the tip, but if the thing shatters, right, when the minute you move forward. And so for us, that's the challenge when you talk to people that hear about blockchain and AI, and that's why we always want to be careful when you have a lot of universities that offer executive education. They present a lot of cases on blockchain, right? They present cases on Bitcoin because people hear it a lot and it sounds like a very novel thing that can transform the business. And it is, right? If it's absolutely the right fit. But when we talk to legacy businesses, what we're always trying to stress is like, sure, blockchain is, exciting and it has its applications, but, for you have to start much, much earlier. You have to do this digital transformation and corporate innovation that we're talking about. It's in a lot of earlier parts of your business. And, it's what's challenging is that, again, and I talk a lot about the challenges in this industry because I think that, I like to be very realistic about what you can and can't do, right? And if I just presented cases on how exciting blockchain is, again, that's great to hear, but what is the actual practical application to your business? Most of the time people selling that are just repeating a case that they've read,
Sure.
right? That's the issue that I take with a lot of, like I said, executive education from universities and people that talk about like blockchain, things like that, is that they're reading something and repeating it
Right.
as an expert. And the percentage of people that actually really understand how to implement it it's a very small percentage, right? And I think that people have not found the applications to it yet that meets the level of excitement. And so for us, what I say is exactly that. It's much more important to transform the existing core business and innovate there than kind of using, some fancy novel thing that somebody from a top university has read and represented to you, right?
Sure.
That's not a good application. But, so you have the traditional legacy industries, and the challenge is largely that everybody knows their own industry. Right? If I go to a shipping magnate or a logistics expert and explain, hey, there are some really strong ways you can innovate here. They understand that, but they also know their industry very well. And so that's one of the, I think more exciting parts about, optimization innovation is that it's irrespective of industry, right? It's one of those things like, organizational behavior or corporate strategy that we know you will always know your industry better. No doubt, right? However, we know how to structure, optimize, and innovate in a way that's been proven across industries, right? And so that's kind of how we think about
it. And finally, we're almost out of time, Nima. But on that sort of idea of innovation, and where it comes from, and you come to someone who knows their industry very well, and you can say you need to innovate. Is one of the ways they can do that, is that by partnering with startups, for example? Can innovation sort of be imported in that sense from outside? Or is it, because you seem to be saying that it needs to come a little more organically than that. The whole business needs to transform. Where do you fall on that sort of debate? If it has to, can you just bring it in, or do you really need to look within yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of views on, when we say partnering with startups, that falls under what we a lot of times consider corporate venture capital. And, what level of partnership is that? Is it a strategic investment because you think their technology long-term is an innovation in the industry? Is it a pure profit play long-term? That, is it a competitor that you want to, acquire before then? And yeah, I think that partnering with startups can be, extremely helpful. Again, you have to, where it becomes difficult is like, if you've partnered with a startup, on a technology play, that makes, a lot of sense if they have a technology that's very relevant to your business. But, as far as corporate innovation, if you're looking at technologies that are essentially unrelated to your core business, right? And this is the key separator that I keep kind of stressing, because you have to understand, are you looking for something that is related to your core business and value proposition or not, right? And that's the kind of key differentiator. So if you're looking at a startup that you want to partner with them, is their technology related to your core business, right? Or is it not? Is it just a very compelling technology that you've seen and you think, is a new kind of area to go in? And I think that my old employer, Yahoo, made that mistake a lot, right? They would look at companies that were unrelated to our core business, and they would essentially buy them or invest in them. And if it's unrelated to your core business and you partner with them, a lot of the times, if it's not done correctly, okay, you bring them in, and now what is their purpose, right? What do they do? What resources do you dedicate, right? Now they're suddenly part of a larger behemoth. And so, I hope my talk hasn't come off as negative, but I'm very, I think careful about when we talk about innovation. There are so many people that are selling it, right? And so many people that are, and especially, I think, within academia, you have a lot of cases that are just being presented. Within consulting, you have people that are, selling consulting services that have been consultants their whole lives, right? And so the reason I stress a lot of this is because you need to work with people that have done it before and are experts in doing it, not once, but multiple times, and have been successful because they've made the mistakes and they know how to do it, just like anybody who's built a business. And innovation is the same thing. And so the reason I stress a lot of these things is because people can get wowed really easily, I think, by what sounds like expertise, but it's not. And so that's why when you ask that first question, is it a buzzword?
Yes.
Not totally. However, it can be used by a lot of people by virtue of the fact they're in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
Right? And we have to be very careful of that when people present, what is the possibilities of innovation? They're limitless, of course.
Yes.
Right? But that's very different than how do you do it and how is it done correctly to not bankrupt your company, but actually make it very profitable. And that's what I try and stress about how to do it correctly.
And it sounds like, Nima, you would go into a company, you would say that they ought to have a blueprint for where they want to be before they just dive in and buy a company doing something innovative with blockchain or AI, because they may not know how to use that.
Yeah, again, absolutely. That's the essence of corporate venture capital. What do you plan to do with it, right? Are you investing in that startup because you just like technology, or is it a strategic relationship, right? And so that's very key because companies acquire innovative companies all the time, bring them into their operations, and then slowly you can take away what made them innovative. And we're going to keep it separate. We're going to let them have their culture. However, after about a year, somebody in HR says, you realize they're using their own, software for CRM. Do you realize they're paying 5 times more than we are as a company for their CRM software? And then, somebody in HR will say, okay, well, everything can stay the same, but we'll have them use our CRM software. And then slowly they start using the same messaging software. And then slowly resources from HR and operations and everything start drifting over there because these are, that's the thing. A company in isolation inside a larger company, it often costs more. And so what you end up doing is, you destroy the innovative culture, right? And so that's why we say you have to be very cognizant of what do you want this company for? Do you want it to be innovative? Then you need to leave it alone and truly leave it alone, even if there's a higher cost, right? Yeah.
Nima, it sounds like it's sort of a delicate issue, and when people want to dive into innovation, they should do so with a little bit of caution, I think. I think we'll have to leave it there for today because we're probably out of time. But thank you very much for talking with us today.
Of course, yeah. I hope that wasn't too much of a cautionary tale. I've heard very recently. I've just heard, I've just been exposed to a lot of what I've considered a little bit more, talking about the possibilities as opposed to the implementation. And I really can't stress that enough, how important it is to get it right.
Well, I think it can be done. There's not necessarily cautionary, but just that it should be done perhaps in the right way. Yeah. And I'm sure that you'll be telling us a little bit more about that in your webinar, which you're going to be hosting for us here at SVIC next month. And I should just remind our listeners and our viewers that's going to be on August 27th. Nima is going to be with us again. He's going to be talking a bit more about everything we've discussed here. He's going to be going into more detail. That's going to be all about optimizing firms for corporate innovation. So do mark the date in your calendars. I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it. And I think for today, that's where we'll leave it. But many thanks for joining us. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Raheem. Appreciate it.